Hello and welcome. It's Francis here. Thank you for coming back to my channel. If this is your first time here, I bid thee welcome. There is a subscribe button below if you would like to help support this channel by subscribing, and also a bell to be notified as to when I upload more content. I'm coming to you from Ghana country, and as such I acknowledge the Ghana people of the Adelaide Plains as being the traditional custodians of this land. So this is my first live. I'm just seeing how it's working on YouTube. But I wanted to just do a recap, especially we've just had a solar eclipse. It was a solar eclipse this morning. And it was 21 degrees of Libra. And also here in Australia, we have had an unsuccessful referendum. And I'm wanting to sort of, as I'm processing the results, looking at the correlation between the solar eclipse and the referendum, in particular because I was rereading an article by Astro Butterfly, and they were talking about the solar eclipse. And I've linked everything below, so you can refer to their article and also the other resources that I have been talking about. So what's interesting about the solar eclipse is, of course, it's solar eclipse happening at the new moon. It will also cross the South Node, and the South Node is all about our karmic past. And there are also other cosmic placements involved. There's a conjunction with Mercury, a square with Pluto, which is stationed direct in Capricorn, also an opposition of Chiron, which I think is still retrograde in Aries. And what I may not have mentioned in my previous video was a quincunx with Uranus, which is in Taurus. Now, all of these planets, even if it sounds gobbledygook to you, have had an impact or adding their energies to the solar eclipse in Libra. And this is sort of making this eclipse a powerful reset button. And as I said, I've been sort of revisiting an article from Astro Butterfly that wrote about this, and what I'm trying to do is sort of looking at some other interesting things that have been at play. Now, firstly, Libra is ruled by Venus. Venus is the planet associated with love, with relationships, but also with values, and in particular personal values. And what is interesting at the solar eclipse is that Venus is very close to her greatest morning elongation, meaning that she's the furthest point away from the sun during her 584-day cycle. So that's the length of a Venusian year, is 584-day cycle. And when Venus gets to this farthest away point, this happens twice in that whole year. And it can be like Venus not being in control, even though it rules Libra. It's so far away that it's no longer in control. And as Astro Butterfly have put it in the article, it's like the host leaving the party. Now, the closer that Venus is to an eclipse or to any transit, this relates to the emotional investment that we have in that situation, where we can be easily triggered, take sides, have opinions. And with Venus being so far away, this actually offers us up now a different approach, where we sort of take our personal feelings and emotions out of the equation to look at the facts, and then decide whether, if we just look at the facts without being so emotionally invested, will this actually change our perspective on things. The sun, which is all about us, it's the me, it shows us who we are, our self-identification, and Mercury are conjunct, representing our ideal truth. However, when we add Pluto to the mix, Pluto can encourage us start questioning things. What if what we have believed to be fair and true actually isn't? Or maybe isn't the fairest thing in the grander scheme of things? Or even just because something feels right to us, does it actually mean it's the best outcome on the whole? And the aspects of Pluto, Uranus, and Chiron also remind us that there will be a time that, despite our best efforts, things will unfold that are beyond our control. As we can't actually force things to happen the way that we want. So sometimes the best course of action is to, again, emotionally distance ourselves from the situation and allow things to simply be. And with the solar eclipse, pairs to what Venus has actually done. Let things be. So things probably or may not have gone away that you had planned. And as such, they're out of your control. So all you can do is take a deep breath, leave the battle scene, so to speak. And in doing so, hopefully a degree of awareness may emerge into that space that has been left behind. Libra, where the eclipse is happening, is the sign that is represented by the scales. And these scales tell us the value of things. We see this connection back into Venus relating to values. And as Astro Butterfly point out, Libra is our ability to weigh up different alternatives from a detached place. Now, this does not mean that we don't care. All it means is that we have taken our subjective perspective out of the equation for the sake of finding a higher truth. In other words, we've been opening ourselves up to the ability to pause, to reflect, and to do so not with regret or making account of all the mistakes that have occurred, but to gain awareness of how the past circumstances are now shaping our present. So, as I said, one of the reasons I wanted to do this recap is that we have just had a referendum, which was a vote to change the Constitution to enable Aboriginal First Nations voice to Parliament. In other words, for the representations of this country's First Peoples to be given a platform to provide their insight into the decision-making process for the whole country. And this is despite the fact that there are numerous other people or organizations that have this platform already, directly or indirectly. We have big businesses, we have corporations, we have mining magnates who already have a voice, yet our Indigenous peoples don't. And further, in 2017, a statement entitled the Uluru Statement from the Heart was presented by some 250 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people at the First Nations National Constitutional Convention. And in the Uluru Statement, it called for a First Nations voice to be permanently included in the Constitution. I don't want to get bogged down too much in the political aspect. You can read all this on the links that I've given below, but in 2017 we had a Liberal National Coalition government, and generally this government, the Liberal government, is representing the big end of town, shall we say. The Labor government, which is the government that we currently have in, originally was set up for the working people, even though they've gone more, in my opinion, more to the middle. So we've got a two-party preferred system. And one thing I find of interest is that it's the mining magnates, the mining companies that accidentally blow up Aboriginal sacred sites that tend to be, that tend to influence, should we say, the Liberal governments more than the Labor governments. Could be incorrect, that could be just an assumption that I've made. Further, it was a referendum in 1967 that granted the federal government or federal parliament to have power over indigenous affairs, which I found really interesting when I was researching, enabling Aboriginal people to be counted as part of the Australian population for the constitutional purposes. So that's only in 1967. In 1988, the Barunga Statement was presented to a then Labor government, Bob Hawke, and that called for constitutional rights or recognition of Aboriginal rights, for there to be a national elective body for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders to basically oversee affairs that affect them, and also for the Commonwealth to negotiate, I barely speak at the moment, a treaty. Now, a couple of years later, in 1990, ASIC, which is Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission, was established. So that came into effect in 1989, and it's been very problematic, shall we say. However, it came into force after consultation of some 14,500 people and lots of meetings all around the countryside. However, the treaty never emerged. And this is despite the government at the time, the Labor government, committing to it by 1990. In 1991, the government proposed a statutory regulation instead and enacted the Council for Aboriginal Reconciliation. It was supposed to be the Council for Aboriginal Reconciliation and Justice, but the word justice was removed. So move forward, say 2022, we had a new Labor government being elected in, and the implementation of the Uluru Statement from the Heart was to be one of the underlying influences of the voice. And having that to come in had been worked on, or was in the process of being working on, or have been worked on, I should say, since 2018. The wording of the offer from the Uluru Statement from the Heart and merging that into something that could be put into the Constitution has been going on since 2018. And when the Albanese government came into power last year, this was actually an election promise. So the voice had been constructed so it could be enshrined into the Constitution, and the only way that could actually happen again is if there was a vote, and also the majority of states and territories in Australia had to accept it. So it wasn't the treaty that was first promised. We don't know when or if it will ever emerge, but it was, and from my understanding, I think even Albanese said it was the first step. And what's interesting is that from my memory, which can be a bit fuzzy these days, the Uluru Statement was actually accepted by all sides of Parliament. However, as we see that it's easy to talk about things when it actually comes to doing it. When push comes to shove, and especially when it comes to politics, things aren't always an equal playing field. Then we get into that political point scoring game. People are digging deep into minute details, digging up dust, causing all sorts of distractions, and almost like a dog with a bone when they latch onto something. And this is, in my opinion, is what we've seen has happened, and it's distracted from the core root of what was trying to be achieved. And I suppose Labor, in true Labor fashion too, didn't actually think things through to that minute detail. Maybe they didn't feel there was a need because there had been discussions, excuse me, about this for many years, many decades, and got to a stage now where is everybody just going to be, excuse me, playing lip service? At some stage, someone's got to have to take that first step, take the bull by the horn, so to speak. And I feel that's what the current Labor government has actually attempted to do, is to make that first step. How well thought out it was is questionable by the experts, and I'm not an expert in constitutional law, and it seems to be depending on what angle you are coming in at and where your own vested interests or lenses are, depends on the slant that you pull or form. So what does this all have to do with the solar eclipse? Well, as I said, the solar eclipse is on the south node, the karmic past. Australia, to put it very bluntly, has had an extremely poor, disgusting, horrific history when it comes to the First Nations people. And this actually stems all the way back to when Captain Cook and Banks first declared this country as terra nullius, or wasteless. That enabled them to take unilateral possession of it because they considered that there were no, or very few, natives, so to speak, from their perception on a boat looking at the coastline. Australia is a huge country. It's the same size as the USA. So this is the perception that they gave up. And this gave them a legal term, or gave the British government at the time a legal term to use to justify taking ownership of the country. And as we know, in 1788, 11 convict ships set sail and landed at Port Jackson in New South Wales. And Captain Arthur Phillip went ashore with his Union Jack and claimed the land in the name of King George II. And since that time, as I said, the First Nations people have been treated, words can't even describe the history that has happened. I said it's all on the internet, you can look it up. And this is something that actually isn't really taught in schools either. So with the South Node, this is Australia's past, karmic past, coming up to the forefront. Leading up to this referendum, Australia was given an opportunity to look in the mirror, to reflect on its past and how that will determine this country, and even to consider whether or not the past will continue to reshape the future. This is what the South Node does. And this is what's happening to all of us, looking at our past, looking at it, taking ownership, or asking us, are we going to take ownership of our past? Acknowledge it. And how are we going to use our experience from the past, from that acknowledgement, in order to shape our future? So Australia has been given, in my opinion, the opportunity to make amends, or at least make serious starts in the process of making an amends, as opposed to this continuous dragging of feet, avoidance of reneging, of broken promises, of creating distractions. Or as Noel Pearson said, now Noel Pearson was one of the people who was involved in sort of merging or massaging the Uluru Statement from the Heart into what was proposed was the voice referendum. And he said this was, are we going to embrace this or keep throwing crumbs towards the indigenous peoples? And this appears to have been the case, the onflowing of crumbs. Maybe the reflection in the mirror was clouded by all the distractions. Maybe the mirror was actually one of those surface mirrors that completely distorts things as well. And we have had lots of other distortions from there to start off with. And anyhow, Venus now has left the building, so to speak, and we enter this time of reflection. Can't change the past. And awareness, hopefully, of the grander scheme of things. As our emotional triggers begin to settle, so does the dust, what has this actually revealed? What is this result actually going to reveal for us? Where does Australia find itself? And more importantly, what is the next step forward? Is there a next step forward for this country? Are we continually going to follow what seems to be happening in America? And I can only see that from an external lens, where America seems to be very polarized in opinions, being just simply black and white. There is no longer the middle ground, or people no longer seem to have the capacity or even the desire to form a middle ground. It's all win-win, but win-win in the fact of, if I win, you will lose, as opposed to, why don't we both find somewhere where we can both be happy with the result? No one wants to back down, because that seems to be a symbol of failure. Well, then again, is it all a distraction that the squeaky wheels are taking up all the attention? And this is, again, something else that I have observed: squeaky wheels getting all the attention, being in our face all the time, because our media these days is driven by clickbaits, if anything else. And what certainly has come to light is the stations that are supposed to be unbiased have actually shown a distinct biasness. In fact, the whole system has been distinctly biased. But then we only see things through our own perceptions, from our own lens, and maybe from my lens, that's how I'm seeing it as well. So I guess regardless of whether you support the referendum or not, the outcome, Australia now has to own up to the choices that it's made, and also any future repercussions. As you may have guessed, I'm actually rather disappointed with the outcome. I'm disappointed in the whole campaign. I feel it's been hijacked with personal agendas. And I do feel that there has been sort of errors and miscommunications on both sides. But I do not think it's actually, the end result has, in fact, widened the problem, widened the gap even more. It was never meant to be a solution, only a step in the right direction to finally make that change that we can then start moving forward. As opposed to, because when we put things in legislation can be very easily overruled and changed, which is what we've seen over and over again, continuously being chipped away. And interestingly enough, it's not just by one party, it's from both sides of the fence. And something's enshrined in the Constitution that's harder to change, as we have seen. So at this point, it will be interesting to see what emerges, especially from those who have been most vocal against the voice. Because they keep saying there is an alternative. It's like, now it's the opportunity to put an alternative on the table. And as I said, I find it interesting because my understanding was that the Uluru Statement from the Heart was actually accepted by all areas of government or political parties back in 2017. And it was a statement that resulted in the input from 250 voices. Now, whether those 250 voices represented every single country, as in Aboriginal groups, there are, I don't know, there's something like 180 languages, but individual cultural groups, I'm not 100% sure as to how many there actually are. But it was something. As I see, at the moment, we have nothing. Where do we go from here? And I find it really interesting because even the Australian Human Rights Commission supported a means to establishing an Indigenous voice to Parliament. Here we are, 2023. 7 years after, if my maths are right, 7 years, 8 years after the Uluru Statement of the Heart, some 55, 56 years after the first referendum, which gave recognised Aboriginal people, and we still haven't really moved forward further than that. We haven't closed the gap. That the problems that the First Nations people are experiencing are escalating, and I don't know. It's just, I feel very sad. I felt that the voice would give an opportunity to start taking ownership. Maybe I was completely wrong, misguided. But anyway, I guess time will tell. But what I found really interesting is that the timing of it, of this solar eclipse. We're coming up to a lunar eclipse in a couple of weeks' time. So have we planted the seed? What seed has Australia planted? I think this is what sort of is highlighting. We had a new moon too. What seed have we planted for ourselves? We need to have more. I'm actually one type of person. I'm sort of tired of having discussions. I think there's been too many discussions made. It's about time someone needs to take that first step, that first action. And that's what I thought the voice was to be. It wasn't to be. Anyway, I'm going to go away now and do some reflection and dig in my garden and process my emotions and my feelings to this outcome. Because I also was actually involved in the polling booth yesterday, so I saw firsthand. That's enough I'll say. So I do hope you are well. I think Australia needs to reflect on this. I personally wonder if Australia is capable of reflecting on this. I hope so. I live in hope. Blessings.